Thank you very much for coming out on a really nasty night outside. Just so people know, there are restrooms out down the hall here, and there's some hot water and cider. So if you want to make yourself a cup of tea or coffee or have some cider and donuts and some Halloween candy. So for those who enjoy chocolate, there's plenty of chocolate back there. I'm Sue Ruff. I serve as president of the League of Women Voters of Broome and Tioga counties. I want to thank Sarah Wilkin in the back row for working so hard on programs and setting everything up so that we have really wonderful speakers. I want to thank Janet, who's also in the back row there, for putting out some good food for people. Our speaker tonight is Chris Berger, and he has a really distinguished resume. He's the owner of Horizon Enterprises. He's a resource management consultant with degrees in chemical engineering, sociology, and economics. Currently, he is the chair of the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition. He's a member of Tier Energy Network. He's vice chair of Broome County Environmental Management Council, and he's active in Sierra Club and the New York State Sierra Atlantic Editorial Board. In the past, he served as a Broome County legislator from the 11th District. He was chair of Broome County Energy Commission. He was chair of the Southern Tier East Regional Planning and Development Board, chair of Cornell University Eco Justice Project. He also is a college instructor who taught science, technology, and society. Chris has the distinction of being the person who started the first weatherization program in the United States in 1977. He also built an energy-efficient home in 1978, which became a net zero fossil fuel home in 2012. So he lives what he believes. We're very, very honored to have you here tonight, Chris. A couple of other real quick details before I give up the microphone. We're not taking a trip. We had planned a possible trip, but we didn't have people to sign up. So the fundraising trip is off. Please tune in to the debate for the Congressional 22nd, which will be airing on WSKG, WCNY, and C-SPAN next week on the 1st of November at 8 p.m. And you can go to the WSKG site and submit questions. There will be a limited number of questions because it's a 1-hour debate. But if you have a question and you would like it to be considered, please feel free. We will also be entertaining questions that will be coming in on social media that night, as well as for those people who attend the debate. Don't forget to vote. I'm sure you will, on the 6th of November. And finally, we are looking ahead at the first Saturday in December, when we will have our annual brunch at Union Presbyterian. The Board of Elections Commissioners from Broome and Tioga counties have been invited. We will also be holding a silent auction of some really interesting and neat stuff. So you'll have really good food. You get to talk with the Board of Elections people, and we will have a nice auction so people can have some options maybe before Christmas. So I'm done with all of my stuff, and I'm going to hand this back. And we have a couple more people who are coming in, and we're just come on in and join us. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This is indeed an honor to be here, and thanks to the League of Women Voters and the Sierra Club. Like I say, it's certainly an honor to be here. So this is a presentation on natural gas pipelines. And to kind of set the stage and give it some context, and I'm going to go back to the Devonian period. I'm going to fast forward pretty quickly, I promise. But this is kind of where a lot of our natural gas deposits first formed. Back 400 million years ago, this planet was covered mostly by water. It was much warmer than it is today, by an average of 30% warmer. Much higher carbon dioxide levels at that time than we're experiencing today. It's about 20 times more, in fact, and about 10 times less oxygen. So it was a great planet for algae, plants, and fish, not so much for humans. And this is kind of, I'm just going to run through this quickly, the kind of how the formation of shale and the natural gas deposits happened. The algae and plants separated the carbon from the oxygen, separated carbon and oxygen from CO2 in a process called photosynthesis. The carbon was then locked in the algae and plant tissue, and the oxygen was released, called carbon sequestering. The marine life gets eats some of the algae and plants, so the carbon still stays sequestered at that point. All the algae, plant, and marine life die. They get mixed with sediment to form a shale deposit, and the locked tissue decays in the absence of free oxygen to form the hydrocarbon methane, and that's where it gets all locked up in our Earth. So anyway, the whole process, carbon sequestering was responsible for changing the Earth from a planet with high carbon dioxide atmosphere and steamy shallow seas into a planet hospitable for higher life forms. And when we burn this fossil fuel, we're essentially reversing that process, devolving the planet, if you will. I take issue with some of my environmental friends that say, burning fossil fuels will destroy our planet. Well, the planet will exist very nicely, thank you. Whether we would like to live on that planet again is still is an open question. So all that, of course, with the buildup of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you've all heard the greenhouse effect, won't go into it. But here's the other thing. Over time, these greenhouse gases have built up. Pretty much starting with the 1800s, and when did our industrial revolution start? Right about that same time. So it's not a coincidence that as we started to burn more fossil fuels, the carbon dioxide and methane and nitrogen oxide starts building at that time. And basically, at this point, we're releasing carbon faster than the planet is sequestering carbon. Now, I tried looking up to see if there's anybody doing studies on carbon sequestering. There's sectors that there's studies on, but I've just sort of arbitrarily drawn this line of the carbon sequestering that naturally takes place on our planet. And actually, I think the case could be made that line is actually going down because, for a lot of reasons, primarily I think because we're getting rid of a lot of trees, which are huge carbon sequestering machines. So the other L we ought to be taking a look at is, as our fossil fuels been getting harder and harder to find and extract, we take riskier, the technologies that do so are riskier, more invasive, and more destructive. And as you can see, it's really exponentially growing in that way. And over time, the technologies, the extraction technologies have become more invasive, more risky, and destructive. And natural gas is almost the poster child of that. Years ago, we used to find our natural gas in deposits of pockets and reservoirs of natural gas down there. And basically all you had to do is drill down into that reservoir and pull it out. And that was pretty much the extent of how we extracted natural gas for a good long time. As those deposits have diminished, as we've basically taken them all out, we've had to switch over to this unconventional drilling, otherwise known as fracking. This is where we go into tight shale deposits and requiring horizontal drilling and hydrofracking to extract that natural gas at this point. Much more widespread since 2005. So anyway, that whole process starts with an individual well site, soon to grow into a gas field where there's gathering pipelines, and here we hit the first pipeline, the title of the talk tonight and the subject of our talk tonight. So we have gathering pipelines. This obviously is you know, New York State has banned fracking, but if you live in PA, you have to deal with gathering pipelines. Luckily, after the drilling process, the footprint of the site does diminish, and you see operations like this or sites that look like this. This is actually, it's not a city from an aerial view. I like this shot because it's actually a view of the Allegheny Forest Preserve. And all that are drill sites and the gathering lines that have been built out to gather the gas from those sites. All those pipes eventually lead into a processing facility. And then, and so here it's depicted all those wellheads feeding into, those pipes are usually no more than 8 5/8 inches in diameter. So much for gathering pipelines. Next comes, yeah.
I hate to interrupt you. Are the gathering pipelines does it run along the top of the ground, or are they buried?
You know, they vary them at times, but I have seen gathering pipelines run across the ground, not buried at all. So the practice varies. All these processing facilities feed into transmission pipelines, our next type of pipeline that we're covering this evening. And they're no more than 42 inches in diameter. That's right next to a house, so you can kind of get a sense of the scale of the operation. And those pipelines, they do get buried. But you can't reforest that area during the lifetime of the pipeline. No, actually, this should be a familiar sight. It's Upper Front Street, just by the thrift shop and Aldi's, going up the hill there. Pull back and you see the transmission pipeline zigzagging through our countryside. Now there you do have, they're required by law to put these markers up so you know where these pipelines are run. So the processing facilities, like I say, feed into the transmission pipelines. Most of that feeds into gas-powered electricity generating plants, and of course feed into the gas companies that then develop distribution pipelines. At this point, an odor is added to natural gas. Does not smell, and that's a problem, obviously. You're basically trusting the operators of those transmission pipelines to monitor it. And they have special sniffers and infrared cameras to detect when there's leaking, but you can't smell it. I can remember not too long ago when I live in northern Broome, and my mom is in a nursing home, Hilltop, and I was traveling down to visit her, and all of a sudden I was stopped by a trooper. What's going on? Well, they were experiencing a leak, and were stopping all the traffic going into that area because, you know, even an automobile, any spark will set this stuff off. So this is happening. Well, I'll get into the frequency of those types of incidents happening, but at least at the back end, at the distribution end, there is an odor added. So when you smell that odor, you need to take action. So the only other thing I'm going to mention at this time as part of the system, if you will, are compressor stations. Now, compressor stations are used periodically along the transmission pipelines to keep the pressure up. It's just part of how they need to transport the natural gas. And they have their own issues. They're big, they're noisy, you really don't want to live next to them. But they can be small, and they can be large. So, this is a map of New York State, and the transmission, and this I apologize, in this case I would have loved to have it on that bigger screen, because this map represents the transmission pipelines, the compressor stations, the power plants that are hooked up to those transmission stations, transmission pipelines, a couple of proposed pipelines, and actually a couple of pipelines that were proposed and stopped by the communities that they were trying to go through. So it also shows some, interestingly enough, where some of the hazardous waste from the whole process of fracking are deposited. It's interesting, Pennsylvania has outlawed the disposal of the frack fluids used to frack the wells. And where does that stuff go? It goes into New York. So we do have part of the whole infrastructure, if you will. We have a number of landfills and sewage treatment plants that take frack waste. So, I've been following the contribution of greenhouse gases for a good long time, mostly because I've been looking at landfills forever. And I can tell you, when I first started talking about landfills were actually the biggest contributor of methane. And then came livestock, and then coal mining. Natural gas infrastructure wasn't even it was on the list, but it was much further down. It's just been in the matter of the last 10, 15 years that the industry, the natural gas industry, infrastructure, the whole infrastructure has risen to the top of the list of methane leaks into the atmosphere. And you may know that methane is 84 times more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. We spend a lot of time, as we should, on the CO2 buildup, carbon dioxide buildup. But and methane is, granted, lower in terms of amounts, but because it's 84 times more potent, it actually works out to be about 43% of our total problem with greenhouse gases. And that's just growing. So from 1984 to 2013, well, you can read it there. There's been 110 serious incidents with transmission pipelines and with fatalities and injuries and property damage and the like. And
is that U.S. or New York?
this is U.S. Now, interestingly, you know, I saw that when I came across this 2013. Let me try to get something more recent, okay? So I tried following the links back on this, and all this is tracked by the Pipeline and Hazardous Waste Materials Safety Admission. It's a Washington agency, under the Department of Transportation, actually. But so it flashed the screen, and then the screen went dead, which usually tells me that this stuff, these figures are no longer accessible by the general public, that you have to log in with passwords to get it. And what's also interesting is, along with this, I should have put it up there too, the rates of increases of these incidents was rising up through 2013, and then I'm sure they're still collecting the data, but it's no longer in the public domain. So let's look at the transmission pipelines. Obviously, when you're dealing with this volatile material, it's a big deal when it gets set off. So here's a couple of shots. Those are two roads. One is a highway, and that's actually an interstate, and then a local road. So, and again, you have to sort of trust the utilities to kind of figure this out, because there's really no way to detect it until it happens. The distribution pipelines have their own issues, a little more personal, and they're pretty horrendous accidents too. You know, you have a buildup in the home of the natural gas, and then finally it finds a spark somewhere, and then the whole home gets destroyed, basically. It's one of the more deadly and horrendous fires that you could have in your home. And there's a street fire, and you might have caught just this past September, where there's whole communities that had to be evacuated because of fires disregarded. And unfortunately, this is kind of becoming the new normal. You used to hear about even the smallest incident of a gas line explosion, and now that's not even news anymore. It has to be like, had to evacuate a whole neighborhood before it really hits the news anymore. Yeah.
One of the things that I did read through the news was that they said there was backflow preventers that had failed, and that part of the gas that went into this system was not odorized. And is that anything you read about?
Yeah, ironically, it's my understanding it was during a project where they were upgrading pipelines, and the pressure dropped, and that and maybe you know more about it, or maybe it's still being investigated. But what bothered me was, well, it just goes to show that this is an aging infrastructure, and actually this would be a perfect time to transition from it, but they're upgrading instead. So the causes of the pipelines, the biggest one is equipment failure, and then you got corrosion. You got material failure of the pipes or the welds. I can remember a story a while back now when the Millennium Pipeline was going through. The pipeline was not even a few years old when they were discovering faulty wells in the pipes. Some of it's naturally caused, some of it's, but there's other outside forces involved, but those are the biggies. So, when you do smell the odor, this is actually from NICEAG website, so, and anybody could check it out, but you know, they're advising you to use your senses, smell, sight, sound. Obviously don't smoke or operate electrical switches or appliances when you do detect natural gas. And yeah, and get out. It's advising you to go to a neighbor's phone or use your cell phone after you've evacuated. But I've kind of highlighted the after you have evacuated because it's getting harder to know how far out you need to go before it's safe, because the incidents are just getting more and more widespread. I want to back up a little bit and talk about energy generation as a whole. This is New York energy generation. As you can see, it's depicting 56% renewables. Not bad, but before you pat yourself on the back, we import half our energy. So in reality, this is a better picture of our gas, our energy consumption, and in this scenario, you can see how big the natural gas segment is. There's nuclear in there, hydro, there are renewables. Coal is gradually diminishing. And then you got your motor gasoline and so on and so forth. So this is another way, and this is where you really would like a big screen. Another way to diagram the energy consumption. Over there in the on the far left, you see the 38% from the natural gas, and that's feeding into a segment of that's feeding into the electrical generation, especially as coal has been diminished. And they tend to be what's referred to as peaker plants, because you might be able to, that dark blue is hydro, so your hydro's feeding into it. You can't really turn off hydro, so that's a constant. The nuclear that's feeding into it, those reactors are hard, very difficult to turn on and off. So they use, because the whole system needs to be built to serve peak demand, they're using the natural gas in that capacity, called peaker plants. The next big segment is heating, residential. Other one, the other big one is commercial. And I can't even see those numbers from here. So, what was interesting, what kind of jumped out at me is that gray air stream. And that is wasted energy to the tune of 62%. So think about it. We have an energy delivery system that wastes 62% of the energy going into the system. And actually a big one is from the electrical generation now. A lot of that is through the just transmission, long distance transmission. There's a lot of loss through that. And then further on, like those pink squares used, the residential's at the top, commercial, industrial, and transportation is the bottom. So we all know that in our residences, our houses lose energy. So that's what that gray area is coming out from the residential. The other big one is transportation. As it turns out, our automobiles are just terrible in terms of efficiency of using fuels. So there's a lot in that picture, and I could go into it, but I can't even read the figures in there. So we'll just move on. But I did want to point out how big a loss we have through the whole system. So moving forward, the people from League of Women Voters wanted to be sure that I not only outlined the problem, but, well, what do we do about it? And they didn't really have to remind me of that, because I'm a big believer in you can't just simply be against something, you have to be for something. So here's kind of my prescription to how we deal with all this. So right there at the top is increased conservation and efficiency. We gotta do something to address that 62%. I mean, really. We need to electrify our heat. There's certainly some of that going on now, but a good chunk of how we heat our facilities is through fossil fuels. We gotta electrify our transportation. That's hardly a blip right at the moment, but that's where we need to go. If we want to move off of fossil fuels, if we want to address the pipeline issue, we have to decentralize, and I'll go into all these in a little more detail, decentralize electric generation with microgrids, and I'll definitely go into that. And then we simply, yes, have to transition away from fossil fuels. So looking at conservation and efficiency, this is kind of simplistic, but I think it drives the point home. We used to, and still do in many cases, have incandescent lights. Well, a more efficient way of lighting is with the LEDs. And then, of course, a really good thing to do is shut off the lights when you're not using them. That's conservation, okay? We get the picture. So, there's great savings, obviously, and this is very indicative of really the whole system, and I'll come back to this, but the fact that, have you noticed that anything we do has an upfront cost? Those LEDs cost more than incandescent. So let's admit that up front, that that's what you're faced with. However, over time, this chart is showing you that in 3 years you will have spent $171 running that incandescent, and $26.25 to run the LEDs. So very quick payback, and then payback in spades. So over the long run, it's a money saver as well as an energy saver. But it's not just light bulbs. We have all our stuff, don't we? Electric-driven stuff. We could do a whole workshop on this, so pardon me for breezing through this, but I just wanted to give you that overall picture. And this is how we generally use electricity in our homes, or energy, I should say. Big piece being the space heating, but the water heating, air conditioning, lighting going across the top there. This is my house, built in 1978, 2,500 square feet, which I'm told is a fairly typical size house, average anyway. This is the north-facing side. Oh, okay, so no fossil fuels power this home. no fossil fuels. There's some efficiency built into it. I'll start with just the fact that the front door has a foyer, double door to get into the house, so it can access kind of an airlock. A lot of windows on the back end, including a 27-foot attached 2-story sunroom with a trauma wall, which basically stores the heat that's generated in that sunroom. And again, I'd love to go into all these details because I'm pretty proud of it, but that's a whole other workshop. But a lot of insulation goes into it, a lot of post and beam construction, thicker walls with alternate studding, so there's no thermocouples between the inside and the outside. And you get the picture. And then there's panels, solar panels on the roof. So it's really good if you can start from the beginning when you build structures to just pay attention to those things and build energy efficient homes. Hey, I did this back in '78, we can do it now. And the technology has only improved since then. We do, however, I readily admit that we have a lot of pre-existing homes, so an energy audit is just super important. There's, and it costs next, it doesn't cost you anything. You have to be making a good salary before it even starts to cost something. You can get these audits free. Typically, an audit consists of, they put a blower on your door, close all the windows, put a blower on your door, then they use smoke pencils that generate a little smoke so they can detect air movement around windows and other places. And then they can also throw an infrared camera on there to give you a real sense where in your structure you're losing heat. So you get these energy audits and then work it, plug in the leaks. This chart, at least you can read the fact that an average retrofit of $4,000 to $8,000 will save you 15 to 30% on your energy bill. So moving on to electrification of our heating systems, predominantly through heat pumps and radiant heaters. So heat pumps, what are they? They're devices that transfer heat energy from a heat source, the air or the ground, into a heat sink, which is your residence. They move thermal energy in the opposite direction than the spontaneous heat transfer. So your house, if it's cold outside and your house is warm, the heat wants to move out. The heat pumps reverse that process. They're 250 to 400% efficient. You say, how is that possible? How can you get more than 100% efficient? Well, basically, it's using the heat stored in the ground and in the air. And for a small amount of electricity, the heat is really coming from those two places, the air and the ground. Air heat pumps are pretty easy to install. They are the least efficient, I'll have to say that up front. It takes more electricity to pull heat out of the air than the ground, but it can be done and can be done well. I'm just going to go back to my house for a second because what I did with my house is set up what I call passive geothermal. And by that, what I did, basically, I have a basement. I insulated the outside of that basement. And then I draw my air, the outside air, through my basement up. And you need to know that below 3 feet, you go down 3 feet in the ground, and you get basically a constant 55-degree temperature. So by insulating the outside of my foundation below the frost line, and then drawing the air through across the footers and the slab, it basically preheats the air that I'm drawing in from the outside. And then that's that much less. I have to raise the temperature after that. So passive geothermal. There's active geothermal heat pumps, and that's basically sending pipes out into the ground to pick up that constant 55-degree temperature more readily. So those systems can be on the large side, I have to admit, and you can either do, if you have a big lawn, you can dig it up and you run the pipes horizontally, or you can go vertically if you don't have a big footprint for your home. Radiant heat. You can put radiant heat in the floor that's basically running pipes in your floor and then put a flooring on top of it. And then there you can use the heat picked up by the geothermal units, or you can use electric resistance heat to heat up the floor, which is actually the best place to heat up. And then of course it rises from there. Or you can put them in a wall. The panel on the top right is just a picture of wainscoting. Basically, it looks like wainscoting, but it's actually a heater that, again, you can run that liquid through that's been heated up through the geothermal or electric. Ceiling. The geothermal obviously takes some money in investing. It's a lot easier just to use a ceiling electric radiant heater. Or what I've used in my home is cove heating. And I have to circle it there because you don't really even notice it there, but the heaters are kind of right in the cove where the wall hits the ceiling. And then radiant heat is like sunshine. It's not the convection heat or the conduction heat, which is works really great with your passive solar heating, because when the sun goes down, these radiant heaters come on, and it's really the same heat. When you experience heat coming through on a sunny day through your windows, and it feels so great, that's radiant heat. And then, like I say, the radiant heaters just fit so nicely, you don't even know the transition. You can't even feel the transition between sunlight coming in and these heaters. So, electrifying, and again, I apologize, like any one of these subjects could take a whole workshop to really dive into them, but we're taking the big picture view here. So electrification of transportation, and that's happening. Broome County has a few electric buses and plans to have more. Electric cars are coming down in price and getting better range as we speak. The big issue is going to be to build out the infrastructure of charging stations. I see that's the biggest thing we have to do moving forward. I like the picture in the lower right, because that's a picture of solar panels covering a parking area. And then you might see, in the upper right is they have cords coming down to feed the vehicles. And how many parking lots do you see around just begging for those solar panels? So, decentralizing heat generation. I want to talk a bit about microgrids. Microgrids are localized energy systems consisting of distributed energy sources that include demand management, generation, and storage. and loads operating in parallel with the main grid, but capable of operating independently, or what they refer to as island mode. It's basically local generation for local loads, or another way of thinking about it is grid decentralization. If for nothing else, for no other reason, to basically cut down on that line loss that was diagrammed for you earlier. The traditional electric generation system is basically referred to as a hub and spoke. You have a central, huge generating plant, and then it's all about getting that electricity out to the outlying areas. What microgrids is kind of just flips that around and suggesting that we develop small local grids that's all connected to the bigger grid, but can operate independently if need be. I could basically, if I attached a battery to my system, I don't. When I put my solar panels in, I'm still hooked up to NYSEG. I basically use NYSEG as my storage because I generate practically all the energy I need, but it's generated obviously a lot in the summertime, or a lot when it's sunny, not so much at night or in the winter. But when I'm really generating a lot, I'm feeding it out into the grid, and then when I need it, it comes back. So like I say, I'm basically using NYSEG as my storage. Under a microgrid system, you could have all the houses in, well anyway, I was saying that if I put a storage unit on my system, I basically become like a mini microgrid at that point. You can kind of go out from there, get a neighborhood, put solar panels on everybody's roof, maybe invest in a community storage battery, and basically have your standalone system working. And maybe not all your houses in your neighborhood can have solar. If the roof is facing the wrong way, or they have a tree they don't want to cut down, you could have a community solar farm out there to feed this small grid. You can have larger ones. Here depicted as, that's a rather large complex, building complex to the in the upper left. Apartment buildings with solar, tie in your wind farms and your solar farms, create an energy storage, build an energy storage capacity, and you have a microgrid. Or you could put a number of smaller storage systems and accomplish the same thing. And then they're all linked, each supporting each other in case one goes down, one's having trouble, the other systems help. Pretty much very similar actually to the internet. The internet was built originally by the military to ensure communication. And how did they do that? They made everybody a little piece of the internet, so that if one piece failed in some way, there was always a workaround to make sure communications prevailed. So microgrids, they make the grid more resilient, more flexible and efficient. Transmission losses are greatly reduced, cut emissions, encourage the use of renewables, are much more sustainable, obviously, increase reliability. With the hub and spoke, a major plant goes down, you're in big trouble. And then when they start tripping each other off, I think some of you can still remember the blackout of the Northeast. That's what comes with these centralized systems. So microgrids are much more reliable. They save money, they generate local revenue, they allow communities to be more energy independent. They actually aid economic growth because it keeps the energy generation and revenues local, and obviously helps counter climate change. So this chart is depicts. This was an investment company, and I've seen a few of them done by a number of investment companies that really took a hard look at the cost of energy generated by different generators. And the interesting thing about this is these are investment companies. They don't have any axe to grind. They're in the business of being right, giving their investors the good information. So they looked at the various sources of energy and did an analysis. They stripped all the subsidizing off of it. Now, all energy is subsidized, at least in the US. In Europe, not so much. That's why you have the higher prices in Europe. In the US, we subsidize everything. The fossil fuel industry, actually, for every dollar that the renewable, the green energy gets, the fossil fuel industry gets 5. It's that, that proportion. And that doesn't even take in, even this study does not take into account what I like to call cost externalities of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are just simply dirty. They cause environmental issues, they cause health issues. And just because they don't pay for it, that doesn't mean those costs go away. It's basically borne by the communities, right? They're basically socialized costs. They're basically subsidies, backdoor subsidies. And this chart does not even calculate that. It's a tough thing to calculate, but it's there. This doesn't reflect it. But even in that context, wind is at the top. Then you have photovoltaics. You got combined cycle natural gas, which you don't see a lot of because, like I mentioned earlier, natural gas in the electric generation business is basically used as a peaker plant. And that cost is way down at the bottom. So all the renewables are coming in at a cheaper cost than fossil fuels at this point in time, and it's only getting better. So it's almost like a no-brainer here, where we need to be going, even from an economic standpoint. So finally, we're going to cover transition away from fossil fuels. Well, why aren't we seeing, if this is so common sense, why aren't we seeing it? Why aren't we seeing progress? Why is the transition taking so long? Well, first of all, I have to say we are making progress, a great deal of progress. Not fast enough for some of us, but it's coming, which is good news, of course. It's certainly, technology is not the issue. The technology to do this transition already exists, and it's only getting better, exponentially better. Efficiency is not an issue. Renewables are far more efficient. Cost, like I just outlined, cost isn't an issue. Even the economy is not an issue. There are 5 green jobs for every 1 fossil fuel job. So renewables and efficiency are job generators, far more than the fossil fuel industry brings to the table. And then when you're using fossil fuels, 85 cents out of every dollar spent on fossil fuels leaves the local economy. It's sucked right out of the local economy. So in my mind, there's basically 2 problems that we're facing, why we're not making this transition faster. First problem, the upfront costs. We already touched upon that a little bit. Any of this stuff, just even taking your LED light switch out, it's an upfront cost. And some people just have it's a tough time. For, people living day to day, just surviving, have a tough time with these upfront costs. And then don't even talk about solar.
Financing.
Funny thing you should mention that, because that's exactly my next slide. So we're developing strategies to deal with that. The real easy one is on-bill financing, and there's a number of strategies out there. This is a pay-as-you-save program that basically you have capital investors that actually give the money comes through the utilities. The customer does have control over who they want to do the work, be it energy efficiency or some alternative energy system put in place. Then you pay that borrowed money, if you will, off through your bills, your utility bills, and you pay it off with the money that you're saving with the efficiency work or the renewable energy that system that you put on. So you're paying the same amount to the utilities. It's just that you're slowly paying off, because everybody knows over time these systems pay for themselves. What do you do with the upfront costs? This is a strategy to address just that. The second problem, legacy investment. I want to bring this kind of down to a really personal level so you kind of get a sense of what's happening here. Say you bought a furnace last year. And then suddenly you learn of a new furnace offer. It costs less to operate, it's much more efficient, it's cleaner for your home, it's healthier for your family, more comfortable, improves indoor quality, air quality, improves home safety, can even help cool your home in the summertime, eliminates dependence on fossil fuel, and much better for the environment. You just bought that furnace last year. Come on, you didn't at least hesitate. Maybe some of these things grab you, as they should, to sell you on this. But you just bought that furnace. Oh, and then it's free besides, with a little asterisk. There's always a catch, And the catch is, of course, you cost less to operate, going back to that buying, financing, and then paying for it with the basically the same amount that you sent to the utility. So you sacrifice the cost less to operate for a few years until you finally paid that off, and you can go forward with a truly free energy source. But you bought that furnace a year ago. So this is actually what the companies are facing. They have a lot of investment in this old infrastructure, and you're asking them to walk away from that investment. So they're not mean, nasty, evil companies out there. They're just being practical from their standpoint. They don't want to walk away from an investment that's still paying them money. Investment, legacy investment. So why can't we just let the fossil fuel infrastructure die a natural death? Why can't we just wait until the pipelines wear out and then simply not replace them? And actually, that was an argument that kind of ago. I said, why can't we just do that? Well, for one thing, we no longer have the luxury of waiting. If we had started down that road 20, 30 years ago when the scientists were telling us we were having a problem, we might have been able to do something along those lines. We don't have that luxury anymore. What we build now we'll be stuck with for at least 40 years. That's generally the lifespan of a pipe you'd want to put in tomorrow. You put in a pipe tomorrow, you're stuck with it for 40 years. The system is too complex. It's, think about a build out of a pipeline system. You have transmission lines, you have distribution lines. You might have just put in a distribution line, new distribution line, but it's being fed by an aging transmission line. So if you just let that transmission line age out, you're still stuck with some pretty new investment in there. So it's not that simple, not that simple. We need a strategic plan for decommissioning. It's better if homes and businesses are informed and are able to plan ahead as well. And that comes out of a strategic decommissioning plan. And I'm proposing that the utilities are actually in the best position to come up with that plan. They have the inventory of the pipelines. They know the lifespan of those pipelines, or should. Plus, they're in a good position to survey the customers to get a handle on who's out there with that furnace that they bought last year, you know. And then we have to develop programs to assist those people who, again, just purchased their fossil fuel eaters recently. So utilities actually that provide both gas and electric are actually well positioned to thrive under this new transition from fossil fuels. What's the problem? Well, the companies tend to be siloed. Actually, NYSEG, their electric people are, in many cases, trying to help people to do this transition. At the same time, their gas department are still trying to promote natural gas. So they're siloed, there's cost centers, there's separate cost centers. The parent of NYSEG has completely divested of fossil fuels. So one doesn't know what the other, well, they might know, but the way the company is set up, they're really at odds with one another. But the reason why I say the utility will thrive, because NYSEG currently, there's a lot of people out there, especially in the rural areas, who can't, gas isn't being delivered to them. They're heating with propane or oil. This is a whole new area for them that they can grow. And transportation's even better. I mean, they hardly scratch a surface in the transportation sector. Imagine a whole transportation sector moving over to electric. So NYSEG as a company will thrive under this transition. What will they be called? Nice. So I wanted to leave you actually with one other thought. There are people who kind of think about these things and think about what it would look like to have a community, have a state, have a country that's basically off fossil fuels. There's a number of studies out there. this one in particular, I just throw up there as just one example. The interesting thing about this particular study, what was it called? Examining the feasibility of converting New York State's energy infrastructure to wind, water, and sunlight. They didn't account for energy conservation and efficiency. So that's a whole 62%. That if they counted that, if it's feasible just using all the energy that's already being generated and they want to replace it with this, if we threw conservation and efficiency in, that cuts the problem in more than half right off the bat. So the other thing that these types of studies point to, that there's no one magic bullet, that these are, like, there's an off-wind part, there's a geothermal, and actually geothermal, when they did this back in 2010, I think we knew geothermal was there, but it wasn't really taking off yet. I think that could be even bigger now. Residential roof, photovoltaics, like, no one magic bullet, but together it's certainly doable. And this, like I said, goes beyond replacing New York generation and meets energy use without importing. This can all be done in state. You don't have all that 85% of every fossil fuel dollar leaving. Assumes no advancement in technology. Well, this type of technology is advancing all the time. It assumes no conservation, I already said. So I want to leave you with this thought. It's not enough to simply be against something, you need to be for something. And I have a little tickler down at the bottom of the town of Lansing as an example, and I'll leave you with that. Town of Lansing, the utility oversold their system. So they were starting to experience pressure drops in the system. So what do? The knee-jerk reaction, they want to build a new pipeline, right? Gets everybody upset. Comes to town board meetings, they're fighting this thing. So they finally, the electric part of the company says, for that same amount of money that you were going to invest in the pipeline, we could assist people to get into, like, air heat pumps. That's predominantly the technology that they used. Plus, they took the school that was a big load and worked with the school to cut their use. And lo and behold, first you got them saying, well, maybe we don't need to build that pipeline, we can do it with, we just have to put an additional compressor on there to keep the pressure up. And as we sit here today, they're not even doing that. How did they do that? Certainly the pressure at the town level was helpful, but I would submit to you that they basically stopped it by doing something different. And I think that's what we really all have to think about. We can be against these pipelines, we should be against these pipelines, but you got to work the other side of the equation. League of Women Voters stands ready to assist anybody who wants to take political action in this regard. Same with Sierra Club, our two sponsors for this evening. I'll also refer you to part of my introduction. I was part of the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition, which is all about helping people get into solar, helping people get into geothermal. So if you have any thoughts along those lines, give these people a call and we can help you out. And that's where I'm going to leave it. What you got? Cookies.
Sarah baked you some bread.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, and do we have time for questions?
Yes, absolutely. You don't have to leave.
I'd be more than happy to field questions at this point. Yeah.
Chris, I was sort of surprised to hear you speaking so highly about the radiant heat, because that's just like 100% efficient, right? As opposed to,
The radiant?
yeah,
Well, if you recall,
like just straight electric heat.
right. As you may recall, basically the radiant technology offers two possibilities. Certainly, it's really well situated to take advantage of any geothermal. Just run that liquid through pipes in the floor or in the wainscoting, and you have a really nice heating system. It obviously takes a lot more to install. An easy install is the electric radiant, and there's those options there too. It won't be as efficient, it won't save you as much, but that, like I say, that's what I'm using in my house. It's electric radiant, and I love it because.
Well, I'll tell you, it came in my house,
Yeah.
and then I put in geothermal, so I don't use them, except maybe when I have company that's right above the dining room table, so I turn it on for that.
And what else do you use?
Well, I have geothermal, and
Okay.
we also, you didn't say anything about wood stoves, you also keep it wood.
Wood stoves? Well, I can't use it myself because I'm asthmatic, so I can't use wood heat. I'd love to, in a way. I love just the cozy fireplace,
That's why we got
but just not an option of mine.
it. The geothermal puts out 90-degree heat, which feels like a cool breeze on your skin, right?
I love wood heat, though. I have to say that. And there's wood pellets. I should say that. A couple of other things I just thought of, and I said I was going to mention this. The fact that the other problem that we're experiencing out there is when communities have fought these pipelines, they've the utilities, the gas industry has gone to what I refer to as Plan B. And Plan B is to feed whatever via truck, compressed natural gas, and truck the gas to whatever user that needs the. They were, I don't know if you recall, they were proposing just such a facility in deposit area, and that was stopped. But so now I'm just told that they're trucking from Pennsylvania, of course, for Pennsylvania. They dumped on right and left. And I suppose that's the other thing I should just comment on, the fact that unfortunately New York State has a history of using somebody else's energy. Let them deal with the consequences and just go on our merry way. And I mean, how hypocritical is that, really, when it comes right down to it? We really need to take responsibility for our own generation and energy generation, and we'll be much better for it.
Since it came up, I have a question about wood and wood pellets. I mean, I see wood pellets in these discussions of renewables, but
They're polluting.
it's a carbon source.
Yeah, they're polluting and releasing
Forget
carbon sequestered
the whole neighborhood
carbon.
would.
I hear you, and I think the only thing positive about wood pellets, quite frankly, is it's not using fossil fuels. When you use fossil fuels, you're releasing carbon that's been locked down in there, and so you have a net increase in carbon. When you use the natural cycle of wood burning, then at least it's cyclical. It's recycled energy, carbon sequestered energy. Believe me, I'm not pressing for we all go and burn wood, but in my mind, at least, it has that one benefit: is you're not releasing that sequestered carbon that's been locked down in the earth, safely locked down in the earth for a good long time. Yeah.
Have you kept a record how much energy you've generated over the years with your solar panels? And I was wondering how it did this year, and I was wondering if you considered buying those Tesla batteries for a home, and you could be off the grid.
Yes. So here's the deal. I did finance my panels, but I paid it off in 2 years, not with the money that I was saving. I just wanted to pay it off. It's my retirement. I wanted to get to retirement without that cost, facing that cost. So that was important to my wife and I. But I did figure it out, and if I had financed it and stretched it over, I would have paid it off in about 10 years with the savings, which of course these things are warranted for 25, 30 years, and you could expect something warranted for that long would last longer than that. But basically after 10 years, then it's free energy.
Right, but that's not the question I'm asking.
Right,
I'm
okay.
just saying, how much did you generate this year, like this year versus other years? What's the actual number?
Yeah, I really haven't paid attention to this year versus last year. All I know, like I said, it's a good investment. It's a really good investment. If you were, there's all kinds of ways to look at it. If I were to amortize that financing over the life of the system, or the warranted life of the system, I'm basically getting my energy at a third of the cost. So it's almost a no-brainer at this point.
So, and have you looked into those batteries?
Okay, so the battery question, yes. So as I shared, I'm basically using NYSEG as my storage. And the one thing that it didn't really click for me, it's nice that they're taking my energy and then feeding back to me. When they feed it back to me, then you start getting the surcharges and the taxes. I didn't figure on that part. But I just chalk it up, well, that's my storage fee, if you will. But when that starts, I'm going to keep track of the cost of those batteries, and when the cost of those batteries start looking like, I could use that money that I'm paying in surcharges and taxes and buy myself an electric, a battery system.
Once you release from that, you don't have that overhead.
Yeah. So, well, I'm getting there. I just can't claim to be there yet.
I'll say something about batteries.
Yeah.
I had batteries put in, they weren't, Tesla batteries weren't available at that time, so they're.
How long ago was this?
2012.
2012.
And if you put them in at the time that you get your solar installation, it can all be bundled together, so you get the tax rebates and incentives on the whole system.
This thing is changing exponentially, like I said. And batteries, I would say batteries are where solar panels were 10, 15 years ago. You can remember back then, they were starting to come into their own, but they were still kind of pricey. They were efficient, but you could wish for more. And that's just taken off. They become a lot cheaper, a lot more efficient. And I would place, that's where we are with batteries right now. They're starting to take off, but they're right at the beginning of that curve. It's just exciting to me. And just to share one other little tidbit, there's a group of us under BRISC, kind of a subset of BRISC, that's looking at, there's actually a lot of people that, like the university and some small businesses that they're investing in batteries. And some of us who are dreamers are thinking this could be like the next IBM, the next technology of this area, because we have a lot of expertise and know-how to take advantage of that, and we could be the energy storage hub. Yes.
I have a comment and a couple of questions. My comment is that methane actually breaks down much more quickly than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Yes.
So you put carbon dioxide up there, it's there for centuries. but methane does break down much more quickly, but
Exactly.
still.
Well, and that's why, what is it, the technical equivalent is like 25 more potent because they put it on the, artificially onto the same lifespan as carbon. But to factor in the fact that that it's much more potent up front when we really need to do something, it makes it far bigger part of the problem in my mind.
My questions just were, you as the great disposal guru of the area, what happens to old batteries, old photovoltaics? Is the cost of disposing or recycling those factored into the?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I've been to a few town board meetings that make a big stink of the legacy costs of, well, what happens if we're stuck with all these solar panels out there that need to be disposed of? Well, certainly everything, all that material is recyclable. Actually, some of them is very valuable material, quite frankly. I mean, they're not worried about gas stations, but they're worried about worn out solar panels. What can I tell you? But no, and so that's some of the advancements that we've been witnessing in solar panels and batteries, that they're paying attention to that, and certainly that's going to be part of the mix and how readily they can be recovered, the materials recovered and recycled. Don't get me started on
lithium is in short
extended
supply.
producer responsibility.
Just lithium, I think, is getting into short supply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as it gets in shorter and shorter supply, it becomes very valuable. There's a huge incentive to recover that stuff, for sure. Yeah.
One of the comments you made was a 40-year lifespan of a pipeline, or recognized potential lifespan. When I was working in the military, they depreciated pipelines over 15 years.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
still-
before you get real sorry for this, the industry that has all this investment, that's exactly, they depreciate it. So a lot of the stuff has already been depreciated on the books. So even if it has life left, and you can understand why they'd want to still use it if they could still make money on this stuff. They're not losing money. I mean, the big losers, just recently, they built in the Hudson River Valley, excuse me, there was a facility, a generator, electric generator, gas power generator built before they had all the permits. Either arrogance or stupidity, probably a mixture of both. They built this plant with no pipelines to feed it. And now they're yelling bloody murder because the community has stopped. Now, they have a problem. Whole new facility. But am I crying over it? Not a bit.
That's like the new furnace a year ago.
What can I tell you? Any other? Yeah.
I just had a question. I mean, we talked about solar and we touched on wind a little bit. But what about water as a source of energy? I mean, we have a lot of lakes, rivers, whatever. And sometimes I think, well, gee, we just don't utilize water as much for power as we maybe could.
I sometimes forget things as I'm going through these slides. But I remember I was going to mention when we got to the microgrids the fact that City of Binghamton is actually developing a microgrid as we speak, and they're using solar panels and hydro off of the rock bottom dam.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly what I was thinking about.
Yep. So hydro is already in the mix. and I could see that growing that too.
Yeah, I mean, common sense wise, I mean, these things are, renewable, and yet we have, we touch upon like companies like NICEAG and others that have, gas and all this stuff. So much of it is not, I mean, our renewable stuff isn't going forward like it should, even though there's a lot of common sense there. But there's also a lot of greed along that industry too, where they just want to make money and they want to keep making money as long as they possibly can. And it's never made sense to me as to why when some of these old plants are, too old to really refurbish, why don't they convert to solar and or water or wind?
They got the land.
I mean, they
for
still
sure.
have their system in place. They could still keep us as customers and just provide it to us
Yeah,
more
well,
reasonably.
that's what I'm saying, that really, NICEAG's really well positioned in this transition as a company, as a whole. It's just that they're siloed thinking and cost centers. It's killing us. Because you go to, the NICEAG website, you got all kinds of, from the electric side, assisting, really promoting the renewables. And then you just do one link over to their gas. Convert to gas.
About water, Cornell has lake source cooling, where they draw heat from, heat transfer from
Heat
the
pump.
lake. That, maybe you know the answer to this, why don't they also use it for heating? And I was told back in the 80s, when we were looking into renewable energy, that over at Tioga Lake, a lot of people were doing the same kind of thing, with lake properties. Have heat pumps going into the lake.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, I have this theory that the Finger Lakes are just melted icebergs. It's cold. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the status of net metering?
Of what?
Net metering?
Net metering.
Is it going to go?
Okay, you could probably talk better. It's grandfathered in to a lot of people. It's still a fight that we're having because the state wants to has pulled net metering off the table.
For businesses that have a demand meter, you're already off net metering. You've got to use the value stack, where you get basically 90% of the dollars as a credit instead of 100%. If you're a residence, you can still do pure net metering as long as you install your system before the end of 2020. That's only a couple of years away. So if you want to be able to get full net metering, which you will then have for 20 years, then don't wait to go solar. And then community solar is already in the same boat as the businesses. You're getting 90 cents on the dollar credit when you sign up with a community solar power plant. So at this point, the best deal is still if you can put it on your site, either in your yard or on your roof, that's still the best deal. The other thing is that the federal tax credit will, after the end of 2019, will go down to 26% instead of 30%. So next, for the next year, this is like our moment, to get the best deal.
How much is fossil fuel subsidies going down?
Yeah, they're probably going up. There's been numerous studies on how much subsidy fossil fuel people have gotten over the years. It's crazy because the fossil fuel industry is 100 and some years old, and they're still getting 5 times more than renewables, and it's getting worse. I think that's probably only near term though. My guess is in a couple of years that's gonna start to change again, if for no other reason than the climate change issues are getting so big so fast that you won't be able to, no one will be able to sweep them under the rug in a couple of years, no matter no matter how crazy they are. It's just so big so fast, things are happening that are affecting communities in big ways. So I think within the next 5 years, we're gonna see a major turning point, major, where suddenly, you know, it's all about getting off fossil fuels. 'Cause
Figure out
we
is
have to.
solar is hitting the grid at peak power. So theoretically, it should be worth even more, shouldn't it? Because
Yeah.
they spend a lot of, in the past, they've spent a lot of money having fossil fuel generating plants, energy generating plants, on standby to cover your peak. So that's real expensive fossil fuel energy. And then we undervalue the solar that's being fed into the grid at the peak time.
That's gonna help with the batteries too, you know, the batteries, because some places the peak is in late afternoon. So, you know, if you have battery storage just for that short period of time, then you can serve your peak that way. And that's probably gonna be cheaper than these peaker plants, I mean, as you saw in the one chart there. So.
Well, and actually wind and solar are good combos because your wind tends to pick up at night when the solar is gone, and then during the day the wind dies down and the solar picks up. So it's a good symbiotic relationship there. I'm going to pick this person over there and get back to you.
Do you know if there are any plans statewide or local municipal areas that are even thinking about setting up
Charging stations? Yeah, as I said, just touching upon that topic, I see that's the biggest thing that we obviously have to get in place, that infrastructure. It took a long time to build out the gasoline infrastructure. It's going to take some time to build out, but we have to, as cases, we just got to do it. Starting to get online, the vehicles themselves are getting better. They're coming down in price. The range, which was an issue for a good long time, is increasing. So
The governor
plus they're
just,
really neat cars.
actually, no, it's NYSERDA. They just announced a grant for people that want to install electric vehicle charging stations. So there's a grant program, just brand new, for EV charging station. This is more for, not necessarily for residential, but for companies or like a hotel. They want to put in 5 of them, or Lockheed. They want to put in 20 of them, you know, so it's for that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
workplaces are starting to put them in. You've probably seen them at 1 or 2 restaurants and hotels. Some of their parking is, you have the...
There's actually a lot of them. If you want to know where they are, we
yeah.
have an electric vehicle, so we want to know where they are. So you get this little app called PlugShare on your phone, and you let it detect your location, and it'll show you all the charging stations around. And when you click on one, it'll tell you what kind is it. You know, will it feed your vehicle? So
They're
there's a lot
all
of
out there, and yeah. You see all the gas stations out there. These will be
Growing like
almost
crazy.
invisible compared to those.
Yeah.
Question about that.
Yeah.
Like, I know the spot restaurant has a charging station there. If you have like a Volt or a Leaf, can you charge with a Tesla station?
No.
So there's no kind of
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing, and that has to be done with regulation. You know, just as they, you know, when we switched over our TV sets to digital, they had to agree on standards for that, and that's where the government is really useful to basically set those standards. So the Teslas will be able to service the Leafs and things like that. That has to be put in place too.
They're
There might
actually
be some interface or something.
They're the Tesla stations. They're the odd man out.
Yeah.
Every other charging station can serve
Fine.
every vehicle. Okay, even a Tesla. So it's only the Tesla stations that are out there. So
Because it's built into the price of the vehicle, right? Is that
I don't know about that. They just decided to be special. They're like Apple versus Microsoft, they have to be special and have their own special stuff, but they're the minority.
Okay, so one in the back and then look at this.
I'm wondering why they're doing away with net metering.
That's a long subject.
Yeah, both of us. We think it's the utility companies behind it. And actually, the concept sounds great. Like I was just interchanging with Gay here. It seems like that energy coming off of solar in particular should be like really valuable. Because it's hitting the grid at those high peak times. But that's, and so that, and I think that was sold to a lot of politicians, legislators on that very concept. But the way it's rolling out, it's not that. Plus, it makes it complicated. People understood that metering. It was a really easy concept. There's certainly legislative initiatives that I urge you to get involved with through Sierra Club, through League of Women Voters, to get those types of things addressed.
Because I own panels in a community solar field that Renova's put in up around Ithaca. And we have, I don't know, they've been sending me checks because NYSEG hasn't connected them yet. They're all set, but NYSEG hasn't connected them. So we're getting checks every month for what we would have saved. But where's NYSEG? What's going on here?
I'll just use that opportunity because not everybody is familiar with the concept of community solar. The idea here is, obviously you can put solar panels on your roof. That's ideal because then it's right there. But if for whatever reason your roof orientation is off, you don't have a lot of land, you want
Too many trees.
You want to save those trees, and I get it. I love trees myself. So for whatever reason it's not going to work for you on your house, there is this option of going into community solar, which is basically you own the panels. So, and it acts as if it was on, as long as you're in the same load zone, it basically acts as if it was on your roof. You had the same, it's coming off your bill, your consumption. Okay, we'll get back to you again.
Well, you were talking about microgrids, and I remember some time ago hearing FOMO promoting the benefits of microgrids. And then I heard that they were going to put a microgrid in Albany, and I thought, oh great, I was just picturing solar panels on all those government buildings. And then we found out, no, they're converting an old power station to natural gas.
Natural gas, yeah.
And that upset a lot of other people besides me, and there was big protest, but I haven't heard anything more about it. What's happening with it?
It stopped. We were able to stop that, but that does show how, the natural gas industry is even trying to piggyback on microgrids by saying, well, we could use gas-fired generators as backup systems to it. Well, number one, that's not a true microgrid when you're using that, because remember, the definition of a true microgrid is it has to operate in island mode. It can't be using energy that comes way off-site. It's a battle because, like I said, they're even using that concept, which is an excellent, that's where we need to be, but they're trying to piggyback on it and sneak into that scenario as well. But we were able to stop them in Albany. That's all I can tell you. Anything else? Yes.
Of course, as New Yorkers, we really focused on energy issues within New York. But as we look a little bit larger across the country and around the world, what are you seeing in terms of really innovative and far-reaching possibilities? We hear good things about Iceland, for example, and geothermal stuff. Germany is certainly done an amazing job so far in terms
We,
of.
we like to use Germany, don't we? Here's a nation that gets far less sunlight than New York State, and they're making solar work. Go figure
Yeah,
that.
and they also subsidized a lot for the people who live there and who were doing, putting the solar panels on their homes. But are there other states, countries also that are pushing?
Yeah,
pushing
New York
these
State's about 5th place in this whole transition. Yeah, it's kind of fuzzy, but we're not the best, let's put it that way. So there are Massachusetts, California, probably Oregon, the usual suspects.
In the world, in the world, China is ripping us to shreds at this point. China, they announced, this was a couple of years ago.
They got a long way to go.
They had 35 gigawatts of solar installed, and that was about the same amount the United States had. And they announced that they were going to double that in the next 2 years, which they did. Now they're talking about doubling it again. They installed the first 35 gigawatts in about 5 years, and it took the United States 30 years to get to that point. So, they're really cooking.
And the real kicker there is this is technology that we
invented.
Pioneered it. That's what's really sad about all this. Seems like there was something else that your question triggered, but no.
Are there some other small countries? We think about Germany and, as a.
There's actually some island countries that have really taken this to heart. Of course, what they're facing is complete extinction. So they're really motivated. What was really sad in my mind was Puerto Rico that had just like a wonderful opportunity. Their whole system was basically shot, and what did they do? And this is very much government-backed, rebuilding the fossil fuel industry. And of course, the island countries, they pay a lot more. All that stuff is imported at a huge cost. So we say it's a no-brainer here. It's they could save even more.
I think related to that, how do you feel about the impact of throughout the world some of the carbon fees, or like California with cap and trade? What kind of impact that's had as far as impacting moving away from fossil fuel?
Yeah, I don't like the carbon trading so much, because that seems to be enabling in a lot of respects. I am a big supporter of what's referred to as a carbon fee, a carbon pricing. Basically, I talked about the cost externalities earlier, the fact that the cost externalities, there's a cost behind that. It's basically a subsidy. If we could just capture a fraction of those costs, I could argue that the whole FEMA budget should be financed out of carbon fees. Because the reasoning being that a lot of the hurricanes and the nasty weather, what's that caused by? So there's a lot of tax dollars that are
And none of the things that you want to supply to a project is the source of the rooftop.